Hello, I'm Esther Gitu Yuart. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. Chad confirms Mahamat Deby as civilian president as Western powers weigh in on their role to counter terrorism threats in the Sahel. Will the next White House occupant be able to restore America's influence in Africa? And Season 4 of the Basketball African League's Sahara Conference concludes in Dakar. We'll have the highlights. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. Chad has confirmed Mahamat Deby as civilian president after a long-delayed election as Western powers watch to see what role, if any, they will play in countering terror threats in the Sahel region. Henry Wilkins has more.
Mahamat Deby's election as Chad's president follows the 2021 death of his father Idriss Deby and marks the completion of the country's 3-year transition from military rule. It also means the Deby family has ruled Chad since 1990. The younger Deby, the former military ruler, won the presidency last week. Western powers watched the results of the election closely, while critics denounced the vote as neither free nor fair. In the last 2 years, Sahel countries fighting insurgencies with militant groups linked to Islamic State and Al-Qaeda have severed security ties with Western partners, particularly France and the United States. Chad is the last of these countries to maintain a military link with those countries. Asked if Western nations will be eager to work with Deby now that he is a civilian and not a military ruler, one analyst replied,
he is more legitimate to a certain extent, both domestically and internationally. So there is less pressure that can be exerted on him to go one way or another. He has a mandate. Whether the elections were free and fair, it's a different question. This is debated. But at least he has this title. He is now the new elected president of Chad.
Some analysts say Deby is trying to leverage his power as the last remaining Western partner in the Sahel conflict to gain better contributions from them. Many Sahel countries have turned to Russia for military assistance in confronting terrorists. Days before the election, some of the US troops based in Chad were asked to leave. The United States has said it's keen to negotiate the return of the troops now that the election is over. Gouvy thinks Washington may confront Deby on the issue, even as attention shifts to other parts of the continent.
I think in general we've seen interest waning since probably around 2021, shift focus away from the central Sahel and towards countries on the Gulf of Guinea, coastal states.
Another analyst, Dan Izenga of the Washington-based Africa Center for Strategic Studies, says he doesn't think the US does want to further disengage from Chad, but may be looking to reassess how it engages with the region.
Have we been acting in accordance with our values and interests, or have we been acting in ways that are perhaps counterproductive, or if not counterproductive, not necessarily moving the needle in the direction that we would like to see in terms of improved security or improved development or improved socioeconomic conditions just for people in general.
Several analysts told VOA that despite Deby's victory, he is not immune to being ousted in a coup. Coups are increasingly common in the Sahel, leading to the nickname Africa's coup belt. This will also play into
how much to invest and whether or not it's really of value to remain connected deeply to a partner that has just inherent instability baked in.
Analysts agree Deby's relationship with France, which has around 1,000 troops based in Chad, is unlikely to change, however. Henry Wilkins, VOA News.
Foreign policy issues rarely motivate U.S. voters, and for most Americans looking at their choices for president in November, Africa policy is not a huge consideration. But analysts say whichever candidate wins will face a stiff challenge in trying to restore America's influence and prestige on the continent of Africa. VOA White House correspondent Anita Powell explains.
Africa is not a monolith. It holds a dizzying wealth of history, resources, and traditions, and the full spectrum of struggles faced by many young nation-states. And while the world's fastest-growing continent plays a relatively small role on this stage, the person who next lives at the White House, whether that is former Republican President Donald Trump or Democratic President Joe Biden, will need to make policy choices that address the fast-changing economic and security conditions in Africa. Trump's past Africa stance, they say, can be summed up with one unprintable word he allegedly used to describe African countries and the Caribbean nation of Haiti.
I mean, he used famously this expletive to refer to a number of countries in Africa, and then he pursued a strategy and a policy that was really focused on trying to look at the burning issues in Africa, the security issues, the hot issues, and trying to stamp those out. But there really wasn't a larger grand strategy.
Biden has emphasized values-driven partnership on the continent, but much of that has been overshadowed by his administration's push against Russian influence in Africa and U.S. support of Israel.
I think Africans are also looking well beyond our policies in Africa, looking at the war in the Middle East, the war in Gaza, and U.S. support to Israel, for example, or the demands that African countries not do business with or engage in relations with Russia. So I think they're seeing a certain degree of hypocrisy in the Biden administration's policies globally, and that's not making them many new friends in Africa.
This is something South Africa highlighted in accusing Israel of breaching the United Nations Genocide Convention with a landmark case at the UN's top court. The Biden administration, when asked by VOA in January, dismissed the case as meritless. Analysts say this shot at America's credibility invites adversaries to take advantage.
You're going to need that credibility because at one point someone is going to say, another superpower is going to step in and say, right, I am not being preferential. I earnestly do not care about human rights in any part of the world, and therefore, at least, that makes me better.
Hudson says the next U.S. president will meet an increasingly emboldened continent.
I think that any new American president is going to have to grapple with the declining influence that Washington has on the continent of Africa, and how much more African countries are asserting their own rights and privileges and speaking increasingly with one voice.
There may be a way to help turn that tide by tackling an oversight both candidates share. Candidates' wives have made official visits to Kenya, Namibia, Egypt, and Malawi, while President Biden dispatched Vice President Kamala Harris to Ghana, Tanzania, and Zambia. However, neither he nor Trump has paid the continent a visit as president. Anita Powell, VOA News, Washington.
U.S. Republican House Speaker Mike Johnson is declining a request by a section of lawmakers to have Kenyan President William Ruto address a joint session of Congress during his White House visit. President Ruto has been invited by U.S. President Joe Biden for a state visit on May 23rd. And for reaction on Speaker Johnson's action, I'm joined live from New York by David Onserio-Monda, a professor of public policy and constitutional law at City University of New York. Professor Monda, what is the major takeaway from Johnson's stance?
I think the major takeaway is that Mike Johnson, the speaker, is really attempting to show the right-wing members of his coalition, particularly the Freedom Caucus, that he's not going to give in to all the Democratic requests. And I think President Ruto's script falls squarely within this space, whereby Johnson recently survived a motion to vacate, and he's really trying to placate the very angry members of his party. So he's pushing back, and in declining this visit, he's trying to show that he's a man that can stand on his own and is not a tool for the Democrats to push around.
But Professor, some may find it confusing when Johnson says he welcomes President Ruto, but also offers a 90-minute kind of, engagement with the Kenyan embassy, including a one-on-one and a bipartisan leadership. Does that in any way take a way of filling the position that Ruto would have taken had he been given the permission to address Congress?
I think diplomatically and symbolically, it's a step down. So whereas you might have the 90-minute session with the Speaker of the House and various leaders of different committees, I think having a joint session of Congress means you have 100 senators, 435 members of the House, meaning the whole legislative arm of the U.S. government focused on one country for an extended period. And I think that's important symbolically in a diplomatic sense. So as much as he's offering President Ruto a time to meet members of Congress, it's very different than having a joint session of the House, because that really means the American people, all their representatives are focused on one country for an extended period of time. And this is somewhat of a step down from what the Democrats wanted.
And quickly, Professor Monda, what do you make of the remarks by Ranking Member Richard Neal when he says the Speaker's decision amounts to his failure to recognize Kenya-U.S. relations?
I think it's spot on, because we've had the president of Korea, of India, of Japan, and of Israel address joint sessions of Congress. And I think African leaders will take this as a slight that, an African leader has been turned down in this way. And coming on 60 years of U.S.-Kenya relations, I think this is a slight in terms of those relations. But President Ruto still has a chance to meet Joe Biden at the White House. And I think that diplomatic angle will be exploited to its largest extent.
Professor Monda, thank you very much for your insight. David Onserio Monda is a professor of public policy and constitutional law at City University of New York. Congressional primaries are being held across the United States on Tuesday. VOA's Philip Alexiou visited Prince George's County, Maryland, to catch up with the 4th Congressional District candidate and Cameroon native Gabriel Njinimbot, who hopes to become the newest member of the U.S. House of Representatives.
How you doing? Look, I know. My name is Gabriel Njinimbot, and I'm originally from Cameroon, and I moved here 24 years ago. And I am a candidate for United States Congress, running on a Democratic ticket to represent Maryland's District 4. We grew up in Cameroon, a small town, where we walked for 7 miles each way to go to school. And when I say 7 miles, I mean walking on roads that are not tarred at all. Roads that were very dusty during the dry season and very wet during the rainy season. And for someone like me who grew up from parents who didn't have a chance to see the four walls of elementary school, we struggled every day. I walked on foot, barefoot, no shoes on. But then I took my education very seriously. And my parents were very involved in our education. They made sure that we did our homework. They made sure that they made sure that every assignment that came from school, we did it, even with the little we had. My parents had to sell peanuts to send me to school. So parents were very involved in what was going on in schools. In 2009, based on the things I know about Cameroon and what I see over here, I went back home with didactic materials, books, pens, and pencils. And I went to all the schools, including the school I went to. If I was not studying, if I wasn't paying attention in class, I wouldn't have been able to go to America and come back here today with pens and pencils to give to you. And if you go to YouTube and look for Gabriel giving back to his roots, you will see children literally fighting. When I say fighting until they almost knocked me down for pencils. This is not an exaggeration. For pencils that I went back home with. For used clothes. It was not easy at all, but it was a lesson for us. It was a way of making us strong and preparing us to survive anywhere we went. And it's helping me out here today because I stand on my feet for 18 straight hours. It is the lesson, the training, the dedication, the persistence and consistency that my parents taught me when I was home. That has enabled me to push through the challenges that we face in this country, especially as immigrants. But I'm here because I want to talk to the neighbors, and especially people of color, immigrants like yourself. I'm an immigrant. I'm from Cameroon, which is why I'm running and able to run for one of the most powerful legislative branches of government on the planet. For somebody who came from Cameroon with nothing, started off working at a seafood restaurant, was a security guard, picked bottles on the streets at some point and sold it to make money, and saved up money, became a systems engineer by taking computer classes, and with help of student loans, was able to obtain a law degree from Concord School of Law, opened up a couple of small businesses, raised 3 children, and married. And today, my name is on the ballot. How are you, sir? Because I want to give back to the country that has made me who I am.
Prince George's County, Maryland District 4 candidate Gabriel Jinbot in his own words with VOA's Philip Alexiou. With deaths nearing 240 and about 235,000 people displaced, Kenyans are mourning their lost ones and trying to rebuild after weeks of heavy rains that resulted in deadly floods and landslides. And it's not over yet, as more rains are expected through June. VOA Nairobi Bureau Chief Maria Madiallo reports.
At Mathare North Primary School, Beatrice Achieng has been preparing food the past 2 weeks for the hundreds of flood victims who are being sheltered in this internally displaced people campsite. She's with Tushinde Children's Trust, a charity working in Nairobi's Mathare and Kiambu informal settlements.
They are living here almost 300 people, and I'm only able to feed 200. There's a county government organization bringing food called Dish in a County. They are also helping us.
Monica Musyoka came here after losing her home in the recent floods. Her 4 children are not able to go to classes.
We hope government to help us with the books to build classes so that our children may return to school to continue learning.
This week, Kenya President William Ruto, who visited the Mathare area, said $7.6 million will be used to rebuild all the schools affected by the floods before reopening them. Also, his administration plans to compensate the victims for 3 months.
Wale wote households 40,000 hapa Nairobi.
All the 40,000 households that have been displaced by floods in Nairobi, the government will give them 10,000 shillings so they can settle somewhere as they wait for the government to sort them out.
Back at the camp, another victim, Felix Ocheng, told us it was around 10 p.m. when the water started flowing into his home 2 weeks ago. He says that while this place is not ideal, he has nowhere else to go.
We can't go back because our house is marked for demolition 30 meters from the river. Everything will be demolished.
In the Mathare area, some homes that have been built along the river are already being brought down. Director of Meteorological Services David Gikungu says the events of the past weeks have surpassed anything that resulted from last year's floods caused by the El Niño weather phenomenon, which he notes continues to influence heavily what's happening now. Because of that, he says, it's difficult to predict when the rains will subside.
We have referred to April as the peak because that is what is normal. March, April, May, and April normally has the heaviest rainfall. We want to see whether under the features of this influence, whether even in this season, 2024, it will still be the peak or whether it's going to go down.
Meanwhile, Peter Murger, Kenya Red Cross Disaster Risk Reduction Manager, says what's happening in neighboring countries also directly affects Kenya.
Yesterday we were having an issue whereby in the western side of Kenya, actual North Rift region, West Pokot, one of the markets was disrupted because of flooding in Uganda. Up north in the upper eastern region, when there is heavy rains in Ethiopia, it's flooding in Kenya, you know? And likewise on the Somali borders and Tanzania.
He also says more people may be displaced if more dams overflow.
Places like Tana River, they are still predisposed to issues, to emergencies. Places like the low-lying areas of the West Kenya, the Homa Bay, the countries that are around the lake region, the backflow of Lake Victoria, which is really now very full.
For now, have an umbrella handy, as this week's forecast says the rain is still expected in many parts of the country, but the storms won't be as strong or as intense as they've recently been. Mariama Diallo, VOA News, Nairobi.
Would like to hear what you think about Africa 54 and all our VOA Africa programs on our website at voaafrica.com. Still to come, Basketball African League highlights from Dakar. Stay with us.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Lino Khmoudou, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
With the best. Rockin' with the best.
In other news, Prince Harry and Meghan ended their visit to Nigeria in Lagos on Sunday. The couple were promoting mental health for soldiers and the empowerment of young people on their first visit to the West African nation at the invitation of its military. Harry and Meghan were treated to Nigerian fashion and traditional dances with acrobatic moves. Rescue teams in South Africa are searching for any survivors still trapped under rubble a week after an apartment building that was under construction collapsed. Their hopes were boosted over the weekend when one of the construction workers was found alive after 6 days without food and water. Authorities say 24 construction workers are confirmed dead. And Egypt is issuing its strongest objection yet to Israel's growing offensive on the southern city Gaza of Rafah, saying it intends to formally join South Africa's case against Israel at the International Court of Justice. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Israel must invade Rafah to dismantle Hamas and return scores of hostages seized in the October 7th Hamas attack. The Sahara Conference of Season 4 of the Basketball African League concluded in Dakar over the weekend. In Saturday's the first game, the Nigeria's Rivers Hoopers defeated Rwanda Army Patriotique Rwandese 78-71 in the first ever BL double overtime game.
It's really impressive, but what matters is this overtime.
Well, this is a great shot from Perry, comes to the fore, nudges himself up to 7 points, very close to qualification for Kigali with a fourth win. And Miles swings it out, shot clock down to 2 seconds, does it go? No, it doesn't, slots it back down.
In the point, just to feed off of that Perry assist.
Oh, put it in there, 3 points, and Boyo finally comes to the fore. Are kind of celebrating because they know that they've done the business. It's all over. Yes, it is all over. The Rivers Hoopers have done it. They've made it 4 wins out of 5.
Rivers Hoopers became the first Sahara Conference team to secure a spot in the playoffs. In the second game, Tunisia's AS Monster defeated Senegal's AS Douanes 75-69, their second straight win in the tournament.
Back over, shot clock down to 7. Marnaoui. Oh, used the glass. That's a big bucket as well. Marnaoui up to 16 points. Try and reverse that scenario. Of course, it goes over the top. There's the chance. It's
in getting them in a good position tomorrow.
And they go for Haruna for a big 3 from downtown. Back out. Opportunity. Another 3. It goes in. Fofana.
Kigali.
It goes out for Chihuahua going getting the shot in. It just doesn't fall. And that's the end of it. And as you can see, it is going to be a victory for US Monastir, 75-69.
On the last day of the Sahara Conference, it was a race for the 2 remaining playoff spots. In the first game, US Monastir beat Rivers Hoopers 73-62, a historic comeback for Tunisia, who was down 0-3 but finishes with a 3-3 record. Here is more from that game.
Best offensive game in the conference.
Amayo floats one up, put it in there. Listen, Mecca, alley-oop time.
2 great passes in 2 different possessions.
Stalled attempts by the Rivers defence, and they could find themselves in a, with a glimpse. They found themselves before in that situation. That's a big score coming in from Adami, and very much the player who's been stand out for US Monastir. Another long-range shot going in, hits it. Mr. Crawford, who wants to stand up. Okay for 3, goes up. Oh, and it's in. That's a big score, but I think that the buzzer, and he was out of time, 59 points to 73.
And the final spot for the playoffs went to AS Douanes, who beat Rwanda on their own turf.
Magic touch, the Midas touch for Fofana, fantastic. He knows a little bit about keeping calm. Fofana floats one. Oh. The draw. Haruna goes up again. Oh, look at what he can do.
The 3.9 whenever AS1 touch the basketball, because they really are lighting it up.
AS1 in a prime position now. And there it is. AS1 qualify for Kigali. This is the moment that they've been waiting for.
Nigeria, Tunisia and Senegal advance and are headed to the BAL playoffs, which tip off May 24th in Kigali. Stay with Africa 54 for the latest on the tournament as we get closer to the championship. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.